All right, in the interest of everyone's time and sticking to our schedule and being respectful, I want to welcome everybody to tonight's town hall. My name is Leonard Presberg. Served on the Fayette County School Board since January 2012, and I wanted to bring this group of people together and start this dialogue. I think having been a leader in this community for so long and then participating in some of the local marches and rallies that have happened here in Fayette County locally have really sort of spurred me on to think about, what I can do as a leader to support Black lives, and how do I turn these protests and this sort of political people marching in the streets for action into something good that happens here. So I wanted to talk a little bit about some of my experiences being on the school board and some of my thoughts on what this all means to me. And then I've invited a whole bunch of my friends here to participate with me, offering some different perspectives as leaders in this community. Commissioner Charles Rousseau is here, Mayor Ed Johnson, our Sheriff Barry Babb, school board member in Clayton County, Jasmine Bowles, and local teacher and leader Ogechi Oparah is here with us. And I'm going to give each of them a little bit of time to talk from their perspective and their view on that on this topic. So, as a school board member and as a leader in this community, I try to examine, what I've been doing and how I've impacted things. And I think about the history of, my very first meeting on the Fayette County School Board. One of the very first votes I took was in support of a district voting plan. A brave group of Fayette County residents, 10 people, had sued our school board and our county, asking for district voting under the Voting Rights Act, saying that Black people did not have, proper representation in this county and adequate right to elect the people of their choosing. That was my very first school board meeting, and watched that lawsuit go on for 5 years, millions of our dollars spent fighting it to end up with the district voting plan that we have now. And it's been interesting being the person who has represented that majority minority district that was created in that lawsuit, and watching that lawsuit progress, hearing what people said about the right of Black people to vote during it, and still to this very day during elections. I remember as a school board member in 2013, actually before that, in 2012, we were closing schools and listening to the public come during public comments and talk over and over again about how they didn't want their kids going to that school with those people, followed up by the local paper calling my kid's school a ghetto school, which, I'm really led a sheltered life. I am not familiar with the ghetto, but I am certain that my daughter's suburban high school is not the ghetto. And reflecting on all these, and then in 2018, we had a big protest on the square in Fayetteville, just to not celebrate Confederate Memorial Day. And I think as leaders, being inside the system, we talk a lot about, how much better things are here now than they used to be. And, we're inside the system. We want to support what we're doing and being very positive. But how do we take, the history of where we know we've been and the impetus of thousands of people marching in our streets to impact change, and what does that change mean for each of us individually and as a leader in our community. So that's why I've gathered all my friends here today to talk about it and give people a chance to listen to us and ask questions and interact. And so we'll turn it over to my friend Ogechi and see what she has to say about it.
Okay, thank you so much, Leonard. So again, my name is Ogechi Oparah. I was born in Fayette County, went through Fayette County schools, encountered the stuff of racism growing up, which we can certainly talk about. But in terms of my opening remarks, I'm really grateful to you, Leonard, and a number of people in our community who have taken it upon themselves to make space and room that centers discussion on who we are as a community and who we want to become, because that has to be intentional. And it takes this kind of sustained engagement to really make what we might imagine for ourselves a reality. So in order to get to school growing up, I crossed over streets named Stonewall Jackson Avenue and Jefferson Davis Drive, both treasonous generals for a Confederacy that didn't even last 5 years. These are apparently heroes that we hold up in this community. Across from the administrative offices is a fountain. Before that fountain was there was a lynching tree where people could go and watch the hanging of Black people. The ground that's now Fayette County was once inhabited by Creek Indians who were relocated during the Trail of Tears in the early 1800s. I say all this to say that we live in a racist culture and have lived in one for the last 400 years. Donald Trump is a manifestation of this country's willful ignorance of its own nature. And so racism is in the water. There's this force of this insidious force that cannot be understated. It's not been without resistance, right? There's been resistance every step of the way. But racism is deeply embedded into our laws, into our norms, into our monuments, into our street names, into our education systems, into our housing, community ordinances, into our financial systems. It is without question in the water. So how does racism function? Racism functions specifically to channel power to people with white skin. That's its function. If we're talking about racism, we could also talk about classism, because together they've worked to channel power to a very small number of which people with white skin benefited from this economic system. But racism works to associate people with white skin so that they may be employed over generations, knowingly and unknowingly, consciously and unconsciously, so that they can be deputized to police Black people. Sure, broadly, we can talk about people of color, but specifically here, Black people. And so to maintain that system requires two things in my mind. Racism operates in part because of active actors on every front, but it also operates because of the silence and implicit acceptance of a majority. So even if you are not an active actor, you may be operating in the second way, which is silence and a lack of consciousness of who we are, right? It's in the water, it's who we are. I think what I love most about the protest is that it reflects a raising of consciousness about who we are and what we've been willing to accept. And it says it's not okay. And the protests represent for me a willingness to point out that this system doesn't work for most people. To change that, we have to be conscious of the ways that we are implicated. Over the course of this movement that we're seeing, there will be urges to stay comfortable, and we have to resist those urges, because those urges actually grow out of a racist culture meant to sustain a racist culture. Some urges include physical distancing. We've seen this in the form of segregation and white flight for decades. Fayette County has higher property values, and it's an attractive place to live because it benefits from a racist culture. Some of those urges might also include absolving oneself of personal responsibility. Well, I've had a hard life too. This was 100 years ago. This doesn't apply to me now. It's not about me. But it's incumbent on us to understand and then consider all the ways in which may have benefited from this system specifically designed to channel power to people with white skin in order to police Black people. And that may be as simple as your comfort while driving, your comfort while shopping, your comfort while running outdoors, your comfort while sleeping in bed. You're implicated. So we all have a responsibility to stand up. And part of that is coming here and witnessing this town hall today. But most of that is the lifestyle that we all decide to inhabit after this conversation. Because at this point, it's not enough to be not racist. One has to be committed to being anti-racist, which is to say you are willing to do the personal, communal, spiritual, and systematic work to dismantle a system that has been 400 years in the making. Well, I'll be happy to share some links and things that have been helpful for me, and I'm happy to answer any questions you may have. And that's all for me. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Just a reminder to people that if they have questions, they can put those in the chat at any time. You know, and I think we can all think about really what Ogechi said. What can each of us do right now in terms of our personal actions to make sure that Black Lives Matter and that we are being anti-racist. So why don't we turn over to our commissioner, Charles Rousseau, next, and let's hear your perspective, Charles.
Well, I like Ogechi, want to thank you all for the gathering in this form. It's becoming more the norm these days than us being able to get face to face with one another. And I think you set the stage very beautifully, Leonard. I've been a part of many of those things that you described. From advocating for our children with the disparate treatment, expulsion, and suspension rates that were evident to us with the naked eye, not the untrained eye, to having to call in the Department of Justice Office of Civil Rights, where they found in our school system that it was disparate and disproportionate with respect to how our kids were suspended and expelled. And part of one of the things that I want to say with relationships to this movement is the after effect. What are your demands? And so out of that, one of our demands was that more African-American teachers and administrators be hired, which took place. A race relations committee was established. And so we organized those parents and brought about that systemic change to this community, which strengthened the fabric of it in many ways. We have to be very, very mindful when we talk about how do we build upon this foundation called community and become a wholesome, breathing, living organism and collaborate one with another to make those kinds of things that make those kinds of changes that bring about the sense of community, the beloved community, as Dr. King called it. It takes hard work. It takes some of the commitments that Ogechi talked about with respect to not being blinded or sitting on the sideline or being silent. Silence is complicit. And so from forming that parent coalition along with some other parents, the NAACP local chapter developed another advocacy group that led to the lawsuit that you referenced as one of your first votes when you took your seat on the board. The very seat that I hold today, I ran for in '06 when it was at-large voting. And because of that advocacy, because of that work, because of that persistent knocking on the door, trying to collaborate with our community leaders at that time, went unheard. We avail ourselves of legislation, we avail ourselves of the court, whatever it takes to bring a fair and equitable distribution of resources and power. And that power, I'm very judicious and careful with that word, not power for the sake of power, for the sake of being at the table where resources are distributed, and where we're dealing with some of those isms that we're here to talk about tonight that have people out in the streets. And so I'm really committed to dealing with, from my vantage point, dealing with those policy initiatives that can establish a better culture to address the needs of the entire community. And whether those policy initiatives are social services, which Fayette County does not have a senior services, and we know the ARC, the Atlanta Regional Commission, is talking about we're being aging in place, but yet we don't have a system. Fayette Senior Services is in place to give them kudos. They make that, they provide that service to so many of our residents. But looking at this in a comprehensive fashion to address those multiple needs, we see a rise and increase in mental health related issues as a result of COVID-19. I know the sheriff can attest that some of the calls, some of the occupants of the jail sometimes fit that description. We've got to have a fabric, a network that addresses those kinds of needs as well. We have a host of nonprofits that attempt to do that. But again, when we talk about resources to really dig deep into addressing those things, I think we fall a little short when we have to rely solely on grants and donations when there's no commitment from your legislative body. And so whether it's education, where on your front, School Board Member Bowles, who I hadn't seen in a while. Hey, Jazz, so proud of her being on the front line, Ogechi with her efforts to run for office. Those are the kinds of changes that we see in the new voices that are coming to the equation. And so when we talk about legislation, we're in the throes of talking about banning any kind of maneuvers by law enforcement above the neck. And I know Sheriff Babb and the police departments here have some use of force standards. Do our young people who are marching, rallying, standing with us, look at those kinds of things and see how we can get better if there's room for it. We're talking about issues that are critically important, again, to the health and welfare of a community, this beloved community. I happen to have served on a committee in 1992 that brought about community-based policing as a result of the Rodney King incident. It is and was a very powerful tool that was used. And part of the premise of that development was that the officers, while they did not necessarily live in the community, those officers did not rotate from the community. They were mainstays. They were there every day. They began to establish wholesome relationship with residents, business owners, civic groups. And so there was a higher degree of accountability that was a result of that community-based policing. There's many other dynamics associated with that legislation or policing culture that was adopted by the city of Los Angeles. And so I really would like for us to begin to look back at that. I know Chief Moon down in Peachtree City adopts that strategy, and she used it very successfully over the last few weeks with the demonstrations that took place in Peachtree City. And so again, the legislation is critically important that our lawmakers look at issues like the hate crime bill, anti-lynching, things like the pre-clearance, when we've seen voting rights erode with ID and all of those kinds of impediments and hurdles that get put into place when we talk about people exercising the most precious, one of their most precious assets, and that's their voice through voting. We really need to continue to have those kinds of looks on the federal level. Pre-clearance, if you don't know what I'm talking about, meant that some of the southern states who were
Are we having technical difficulties?
I think we lost Commissioner Rousseau.
All right, see, don't know how it happened, but you know, I guess his time must have been up. But you know, he was bringing up some important points, I think, with his work in Los Angeles, right? The you know, the impetus for this protest, George Floyd, and right? It's all centered around a lot of law enforcement policies. And I know after I wrote my piece on the march on Saturday, the sheriff called me up the next day and brought me his use of force policies and all the policies that his department uses. So when we talk about, you know, the 8 reforms that police should make and things like that, I think we do pretty well on that area. But I'd love to turn it over and give the sheriff a few minutes to talk about that and other thoughts. So my neighbor, Barry Babb.
Appreciate the invite there, Leonard. It's you know, I've had the opportunity lately here to talk to a lot of people. People have called the office asking a lot of questions, and you know, it's been great to be challenged by that, because I think people are shocked sometimes when I tell them you're my boss, and I have an evaluation every 4 years to be able to stay here. So it's very important to hear what people are saying, and I get it. This is absolutely a trust issue for law enforcement, and we've got a lot of work left to do. We got a long ways to go. Probably the best thing that ever happened to me as far as my career was to lose an election. That sounds crazy, but I had been here at the sheriff's office for 21 years, and of course, like Mr. Oparah, you know, this was home. This was now I was born at South Fulton Hospital, because we didn't have a hospital then. I don't even think Clayton County had a hospital, but I was born at South Fulton. That was the closest hospital. Came here and have lived here my whole life, and my family's been here for generations. And so a lot of things you took for granted growing up here and working at the sheriff's office, you know, through 2008. But after I lost, as politics sometimes dictate, you kind of get shifted, and I had to start from scratch. And I chose to do that with the Atlanta Police Department. So at age 43, I went back through the academy with Atlanta. I picked Atlanta for various reasons. One is I love the city. I consider Atlanta, like Fayette County, my hometown. Growing up there, I mean, I even worked at Rich's at one time, if anybody remembers Rich's. But, you know, it's home. And so going up there and being back on the street, and then in an environment that I was in, when I came back to Fayette County, and I understand wanting to make change, absolutely, because I can go back to why I became a law enforcement officer, because I didn't like the things that I was seeing. And there were a lot of things went into motion that pushed me into law enforcement, because my parents thought that I was actually wasting my life, that there were so many other avenues for me to, let's say, be more financially secure, because I can go back to the time I was a sergeant and actually qualified for WIC vouchers because of the amount of money I made as a sergeant here at the sheriff's office, with 3 kids and a wife and a mortgage and a minivan payment and all the things that went with that. But my college roommate was killed by a drunk driver. Just so many things that push you. And when I think, I love quotes. I absolutely love quotes. And Albert Einstein said, "My contempt for authority made me one. Fate made me one." And that's probably what happened to me, is questioning authority. So even in my career, I've questioned that authority. Obviously, there's some certain avenues that you have to do it. But after my experience in Atlanta, just those 3 years, wanting to make the changes that I knew meant a lot to me at our home here in Fayette, that we were way behind. And so when I came in 7.5 years ago, it was to change culture. It was to be ready, because one of the things that I got to experience working downtown was the Occupy Atlanta movement. And so that taught me a lot. That taught me about what we would refer it to as First Amendment assemblies, and how to properly do that, how to make that happen for folks to be able to get their message out and keep everybody safe, and all the things that go with that. So as far as, and I've had a question since that Saturday. Was that the largest demonstration outside of the city of Atlanta? And I think it has to be yes. I wish somebody could answer that for me, but that's how amazing that is. So a lot of things I've been preaching for the last few years here, and that's why when I got the email from Leonard that was like, I actually already had the USB drives with our policies that were in question because of everything that was going on. You just became the next guy when your email came out to hand that to. And of course I gave it to Pastor Vance with the NAACP. And so, because I wanted folks to see the 8 things. Of course, we probably don't have time for that, but the 8 things that most police policies don't address, we address the 6 of those things in policy. And the 2 things we address in our training, which it's more appropriate that it's training and not policy. So it does de facto become your policy because it's your procedure. So I'm proud of that because that's part of changing our culture, being ready for everything that I knew that we were going to face, training. And I know Commissioner Rousseau can tell y'all how much I believe in training. Training is one of those things, the best way I can explain training, especially for what I would say would be soft tactics would be, what we would call like crisis intervention training. And that's something we started requiring. The fact that it took me a little while because of budgetary constraints, asking for a few years, but we finally got everybody with body-worn cameras. And so all these different things that we went in, but training, to go back to training, and I'll get off on a side note here in a second, so you have to watch me. But training is really my passion because I think of training as a vaccine.
I know you're, often prone to maybe going off on a tangent, but, just a little time warning, that's all. It's
okay.
all good.
I'll say this, and then I'll close on this part of it. Vaccine. We take a vaccine because it's a small part of the virus. In today's world, we know all about that now, but it's like a flu vaccine, and it inoculates you to that. So training is one of those places where you put all your weight, because you can replicate a lot of things in training to inoculate that so that the officer or deputy has experienced that. So when they go into the world, they're already prepared, or as prepared as we can make them. So many things that I would love to talk about, and I'm sure we'll probably get some questions, but anyway, thank you.
Thank you, sir. All right, is the mayor there? I know we can't see him, but I think maybe if he unmutes, we could hear him. Give him a second to see if that happens or not. While we see if that happens, the first question we got in the chat was related to anti-racist teaching in schools. So how I personally am trying to start that conversation is I have offered a copy of this book, Teaching for Black Lives, to Fayette County school system employees who want one. I just got 50 copies of this book for the first 50 people, teachers who asked for one, and I'm going to start distributing those and starting some book conversations related to that. So thank you, Tanisha, for your question about that. And let us see if the mayor is here, I think. Yes?
Yes, I am.
All right.
Good evening, everyone.
Welcome.
Thank you, Leonard. Appreciate the invitation, and thank you for all those who've already spoken. Unfortunately, everybody has kind of hit on the high points that I would have said, but as means of introduction, those who do not know me, I'm Mayor Ed Johnson for the city of Fayetteville. Have been a longtime resident of 26 years in the city of Fayetteville. My family and I came here while serving in the United States Navy. My wife and I are both Navy officers, and as a result, we retired after spending 20 plus years, and we experienced a lot of racial issues while serving in the military in the early years of the 70s and the 80s. But it was an eye-opening for us because we realized that the military, especially the government, had a lot of mechanisms in place to address injustice and inequality. And so we availed ourselves of those things that were in place. And so when we moved here to Fayetteville, recognizing that we moved into a community that was a small population of African Americans, we moved here because of the great school system. Both our sons were ahead of themselves academically, and we wanted them to continue. And so when we moved to Fayetteville, it was an eye-opener. Like someone has already said, the school system was somewhat slanted towards the minority students. Our first experience was my oldest son was in 11th grade, and he had taken all of the advanced math courses, and the school system tried to put him back into a remedial math class without testing him or anything, just said that the classes were too advanced for him to get into the advanced class as well. We insisted, and my wife and I went down and had conversation with the counselors, and they ended up trying to test my son, and he obviously passed all the tests, and we quelled that effort to marginalize our son. And from that point on, we realized that we had to be involved, not just in the school system, to monitor, to make sure that our children was not put in one particular category that made them inferior or incapable, but we had to get involved with other aspects of the city and the county government. I'm also a long-standing president. I served for 6 years as the Fayette County NAACP, and I was serving, doing a lot of the things that have already been discussed, like district voting. We were successful in getting a racist judge removed from the bench in the Fayette County court system. We were proactive in helping get selected an African American who served as the first judge on the Fayette County circuit. And we were just realizing that if we're going to make a change, we need to, first of all, be a part and understand how the system worked. And so as the president of NAACP, we took the lead and made sure that we tried to address all of those issues that minority people were dealing with in the Fayette County, Fayetteville area. And subsequently, I became involved and interested in politics. This came about because I'm the pastor of Flat Rock AME Church, which is the oldest African-American church in Fayette County. And as the pastor in 2016, when President Barack, I'm sorry, 21st term, 2008, when President Barack was elected, we were the victims of racial, destruction. Someone passed and shot a shotgun blast in our door. And it presented an opportunity for us to reach across racial lines in the faith community and to gain relationship with some of the larger, predominantly white churches. And so as a result, we realized that we had to do what we term to be educating the alternative race to what it is that our culture is about. And so we were very proactive in what we call building bridges of biblical brotherhood and reaching out not only to the African-American churches and building alliances, but we reached out to many of the larger Caucasian churches. And we built relationships that were mutually beneficial for all of us to understand each other. And I think we've made some great inroads with that. But as a result, I was encouraged and sought political office to serve as a city councilman in 2012. I won that election, and then subsequently in 2016 was elected to be mayor, and beginning my second term now. I want to say that we have made a lot of progress in Fayetteville, I think in Fayette County in general, but I like to address Fayetteville because that's what I'm responsible for. And I think we have been very intentional about making sure that our staff and the Fayetteville city staff is diverse from upper management to the lowest level. We ensured that when we hired our police chief, that he was one who embraced our vision of diversity in our police department, but also ensuring that the police officers that were already on the police force were able to gain training. As Sheriff Babb said, I'm a firm believer, training helps, educate as well as ensure that your officers develop the discipline that they need. And so we consistently conduct racial diversity and sensitivity training with our officers. I was so proud that our chief, when he came on board, recognized that our vision was to make sure that police officers engaged in the community. And so he formed a community policing department. And so we have officers who go out and be involved in homeowners association meetings, youth meetings, working with Boy Scouts. Every year we do shopping with the cop around Christmas time. Once a month we do coffee with the cop, so you can sit down and citizens can come where we're meeting at and just engage with the officers and ask questions. So it gives the citizens of Fayetteville a sense of comfort to know that their officers are willing to get to know them. So we're proud of what we've accomplished. Are we a perfect city? No. Again, I emphasize that no organization is without potential tarnish from one bad apple, but I think that we are very vigilant and we are accountable to the citizens of Fayetteville to make sure that we're responsive. I would say that in the time I've been an elected official, we have fired, terminated several police officers who did not understand the culture we're trying to cultivate in the city of Fayetteville. And so I think we've been very authentic in making sure that citizens understand that, you need to be engaged. You need to be engaged. At every level, we try to form citizen committee with our finance department, with our comprehensive plan development, and we wanted citizen input. We heard loud and clear when I first got elected as a councilman that the NAACP was in opposition to the Confederate monuments in Fayette County and Fayetteville, and we were intentional. Unfortunately, it has taken us some time. There is an expense in renaming streets and getting businesses to bear the cost of all of their publicity, as well as getting all maps and everything redone. And we were approaching addressing that right before COVID-19. Since recently, we have regained our focus on that. And I assure you that we will be addressing renaming of streets named after Confederates within the next 2 or 3 months. Again, it is a financial burden. The city, like most of the cities in Fayette County, like most of the cities in general, have taken a financial hit because of the COVID-19 pandemic, and we were trying to rebound from that. But I just want the citizens to know that it is on our radar scope. Please understand it takes time. We realize that there are some things in policy that can be changed within a meeting or a month or something like that, but there are some other things that takes a little bit of time. And I think that we have demonstrated to all the citizens that we are a diverse city council. Now that we have council members that represent all ethnic groups as well as all political persuasions. But we are a united council, and we work diligently to address the issues. And when there is need for education and understanding, we sit and have a dialogue and discussion, which I think is critical. I'm a firm believer in Dr. Martin Luther King's philosophy of nonviolence. I think to protest is a great thing. We supported it in the city of Fayetteville, as Sheriff Babb mentioned. 2,200 people showed up for last Saturday's, I like to call it a march. I don't like to call it a protest. I understand that there were some things that was being spoken out against, but I think because it was a peaceful march and rally, you got the attention of the vast majority of the people in Fayetteville and Fayette County. And so I'm a strong believer that if you want change, you have to advocate for change, but you also need to be a part of speaking out so you can educate people about the expectations of the change that you want. So I'm going to close my mouth right now and ask if there are any specific questions for me.
We got some questions, but before we get to those, I do want to. I know you have to leave at 7, so we'll get to your questions in a sec. But I do want to give my colleague Jasmine Bowles a chance to address us. I've known Jasmine for a number of years, helping her run for office, but currently she is involved in a program called School Board Partners, which I am a fellow in based on her prodding and an invitation, but a group of school board members from all over the country specifically getting together to work on how do we as a group be more anti-racist. And so I would love to hear, her perspective growing up as a neighbor of Fayette County and a frequent visitor, and her perspective as a school board member. And Jasmine, take it away.
Sweet. Good evening, Leonard, and good evening, everyone. It is so awesome to be on such an esteemed panel. I am happy to be here tonight and grateful for this space. I also want to name just how, I'm going to bring my whole self, and the part of me outside of the grateful part is honestly really tired, overwhelmed, exhausted, and, frankly, traumatized by the overwhelming amount of stuff. The emergencies change all the time. And just yesterday, Leonard and I were problem solving, feeding children, and closing the digital divide in regard to COVID. When it's not the budget or COVID or something else, here we are, right? So I am really grateful for this space, but it is a lot right now. And I think about, Ogechi, your point resonated with me because I too operate under the assumption that all systems are inherently racist. And that is because not one system was created with anybody who looks like me in mind. And so if you are a part of a education system, economic system, police system, any of those systems, I think it's, while the racism may not have been our fault, if we are in these spaces now, tackling it is our responsibility. And so that's really another reason I'm glad to be here with you all, because if you enter the space of leadership under the assumption that even if you didn't create it, it wasn't created for everybody, and you assume that, then what option do you have but to identify yourself as an anti-racist? Because you have to undo it, against racism. And so, I really echo a lot of the comments from the earlier panelists, but, if I had to think about some ways to go from protest to action. I really like the concept of proof, and a lot of you all know why, right? Like being about it. And so one of the ways that I would challenge anybody within the sound of my voice to even begin looking inward is to remember how any system works and where their values are revealed. And one of the first places that you can find anybody's values is in their wallet and in their budget. And so on a micro level, it could be a really cool activity on a personal level to think about how you spend your money and how much of it is allocated to support the vision and values you believe, and then scaling that same activity to your local school system, your local school, your local commission, your local police department, and you'll be able to see where some of the systems that we live in values live. So are there any, what is the ratio of Black or local or small or brown owned businesses that, your system might actually partner with? Racism embeds itself in so many ways. And when I think about all the undoings in addition to the street names, I live in unincorporated Fayetteville, which actually sits in Clayton County. So I too drive by Jeff Davis. I see neighborhoods that have plantation on them. Here in Jonesboro, the county seat of Fayetteville, there's a cemetery completely dedicated to Confederate soldiers from the Battle of Jonesboro. And so, yes, there's all these environmental assaults. There's the videos of, Black lives being lost at the hand of police, but there's also these day-to-day commitments that we can make with our dollars, with our votes, with our voices. And I think that's where I'll end is Mr. Rousseau beautifully talked about how, silence is compliance. And that is so true. And I also want to challenge people to think about what silence means, because it doesn't mean tweeting. It doesn't mean your Facebook status. Like when we talk about folks who are silent, it manifests itself in other ways that you have a voice that you don't use. So it's that Black business you don't support. It is that budget we didn't actually pry open to see how many of our hired staff look like our children. It is deeply entrenched in so many of the ways that we operate and function that I want us to push past the assault of being labeled, potentially racist or historically racist, and just operate under the assumption that, if there are systems that were designed without people, then they're inherently inequitable. And so I'm really excited to continue deconstructing some of the ways that all of the isms manifest themselves. And so, again, kudos and shout out to you, Leonard, for creating this space. But I also think, especially as a Clayton County resident, where we're mostly Black and brown folks, ageism is also a thing. And here you've got young people also, allowing us to have an intergenerational conversation. And so, yeah, between classism, sexism, ageism, and gender discrimination, there's so many ways that we can continue this work outside of a protest, outside of the ballot box, and outside of social media.
Thank
Mr.
you.
Facilitator, I'm tempted to reclaim my time since I went out, but I'm going to let it flow.
We had a question in the chat from Ronald about this. Jasmine just mentioned all these isms and the systems that we live in, and so how do we have these conversations about the systems to dismantle them and reach across our bubbles, and we're in Fayette County, we like our bubbles, and address that culture and change those narratives. And I think, Ogechi, do you want to jump in and speak to that?
Sure. I was in a conversation with some alums from Princeton, where I went to school, and we were actually talking about this very thing. One of the things that came up there was ask yourself, where do I shop? Where do I worship? Where did I get my degree? Who gives those degrees? Where do I live and how did I get there? I mean, these kind of questions, but the questions are really about who's my sphere of influence. One of the functions of a racist culture is also the idea that you don't have the power to change it, that it has to stay the same. And so, it can be confounding to hear, I just don't know what I can do. I don't know, when there are so many different things that one can do, that looking at your sphere of influence, where you have the most power in your own family, right? That's where hard conversations happen. And, you know, they still love you after that, or sometimes you got to take a pause. But being willing to have those conversations where you have influence, where you have the ability to make a difference, is a great place to start. Some people who are, you know, they're not CEOs, or they're not at a, you know, they may think I'm not at a position of power, but you have the opportunity to ask a question, in particular people with white skin, to call things out that are problematic, and to ask questions about how do we do things. Everybody should be asking those questions, but I think particularly, I think the onus is on those who might not otherwise be at a greater risk to ask those questions and to call those things out. So, you know, and also just getting proximate to things, reading, educating yourself, and I'll share links as well. What's exciting about this time is that, you know, the New York Times nonfiction bestseller list, I think, was like all anti-racist literature, which is encouraging, but it has to last, right? This is a lifestyle again. So having those hard conversations, and in that conversation, there's a wonderful woman, Janet Stovall, who spoke about this continuum. First, you have to ask. You have to be willing to absorb what you hear. You can hold what your own truths are over here, but be able to absorb what you hear, and then accept what you hear. You know, oftentimes another function is rejecting it, distancing yourself from what you hear. Is, oh, well, what about, that's an urge that came out of the system that was created to maintain itself. So call that out and know that that's there. And then when you accept what you hear, you then have to be able to adjust based on what you hear. And that's an action. But finally, in this spectrum, it's being able to articulate, being able to speak out and say that's part of a process. Some people might be skipping steps. They haven't talked to any of their, you know, any people of color. They might not have talked to you know, red, but they're ready to talk about something. But really ask first, absorb, accept, adjust, and be willing to articulate. Use your voice wherever you are to make a difference. And it starts at home. It starts with you, and then it radiates out in your spheres of influence.
Along that line, let me just, Ferrer's pedagogy of race.
Hold on
Yeah.
1 second, Charles. I know Ed has to leave at 7. Ed, did you have any closing remarks before you have to run? And then we'll go to Charles. And then I know we got some questions in the chat for the sheriff.
No, I just wanted to make sure there are no questions for me. And if there are questions a little bit later after this conversation, you can always call me. The number posted on the website for Fayetteville City Hall is my personal telephone number. I am an accessible politician, so feel free to call me. I will give you the straight answer. May not like the answer, but I'll give it to you from the bottom of my heart with every bit of sincerity and authenticity.
So we appreciate you, and I think the march and the changes that we've seen in Fayetteville since you've been around in the last bunch of years has been impressive. So thank you so much, Mayor.
Thank you, and I apologize for my departure. Just have a Bible study to teach tonight. Thank you.
All right, bye-bye. All right, Commissioner.
I just wanted to piggyback on the question and Ogechi's comments related to that. There's a very powerful book by Ferrer. It's called The Pedagogy of Race. Powerful book. I encourage people to look at that, read that. It talks about the isms that Jasmine touched on a little bit, classism, and how the system is designed to protect itself from exposure. And it's a very difficult conversation that we're on the verge and the precipice of having. It requires people, as Ogechi said, to shift, to act, to do something. And we unfortunately in Fayetteville in Fayette County have had to do it with a great deal of pressure beyond the protests and the rallies that you've seen. Again, as I said before, we've availed ourselves of legislation, we've availed ourselves of courts. But the hard part is the unwillingness to change. And so we've had to press and use those options to force people, in essence, to do what is right. And that's my biggest frustration in this servant leadership capacity, is the unwillingness to adopt and shift and act without pressure or force. And the system won't change. I think Ogechi put something out a little while ago. I'm just getting used to Bookface. And she put out a famous quote by Frederick Douglass. Power doesn't concede anything without a demand. And that's what we're witnessing right now. We're witnessing a demand for equality. We're witnessing a demand for equity. And we're witnessing a demand for substantive systemic changes that benefit the community, of which Black people happen to be strong contributors within. And when that system refuses to move, then it crumbles on its own weight. Every great civilization that you may think of in history has fallen under its own weight of arrogance. That's my interpretation of some of the things that I've seen in these so-called great civilizations. And we need to be careful, mindful that if we're responsible leaders, we're willing to listen to one another and make some shifts. I think invariably what we find, Ogechi mentioned it too, is our counterparts have a very difficult time telling their neighbors, their friends, and those in their social network, standing tall and calling them out. And that's a human response. It's okay. But if we're going to have some substantive progress, people on the other side of the equation are going to have to make their friendship circle uncomfortable and adopt some meaningful changes that will be coming down the pipeline. You can rest assured they will be coming. And the quicker we adopt and not resist, I think the more harmonious the process can be. It won't be, but it can be a little bit more harmonious because it always invariably turns into a fight. We get into our respective corners. We put up our dukes and we're ready to go at it to maintain what we have as opposed to being inclusive and bringing in others to this thing that we call in the arena of this tent, getting under this tent. And again, this is all about community. When we inject politics into the equation, we lose sight of good policy, trying to espouse our political mantras, so forth and so on. So the Ferrer's Pedagogy of Race, I started out saying, is a very, very powerful book, very powerful book.
Thank you, Commissioner. Sheriff, we had a couple questions, one related to getting a copy of some of your policies, and then the other sort of related specifically to, how you measure, how you're making sure you're not doing racial profiling and that sort of thing in terms of what your officers are doing.
Right. We are very proud of our policy. A lot of people, are asking, do we write it? We actually have input, but we actually don't write it. We are the first agency in the state, law enforcement agency, to have this type of policy where it's actually written by attorneys, and it's a company, and it's called Lexipol. So as far as posting it, and I tried to answer it online because I knew we were running out of time. Since it is a company that we partner with to do this, and it makes it a living document. In other words, they're constantly watching what the 9th Circuit is doing, the 11th Circuit, and they'll adjust that, and then they'll transmit it, and they'll change policy, and then we have to check off on it, and that we've watched, read, whatever it takes to get that policy. So part of that policy is bias-based policing. That's part of our training as well. So I don't know without checking with the company, since technically it's a living document, but we're partnered with somebody to do it, if I could post that without there being some sort of violation with our agreement with them. But it is open records accessible. So I put it on there, my email address, so that like you made you a copy, that we can make copies for other folks, because that way I know I can release it. Posting it and putting it online might be a little bit difficult without checking into that. The other question I tried to answer online, and right now it's evading me what it was. What was it?
It was related to racial profiling or how you measure things.
The bias-based policing, and I think that's what we covered. It is in our policy. It is in our training. I think the other thing was there was a question about, I saw something pop up at once about psychological training. Or psychological evaluations? Yes, we do that at recruitment, and we also do that. Certain things can trigger officers having psychological fit for duty evaluations is actually what we call them. And obviously they don't come back until doctors agree that everything's fine, because we're in a world today where we all need that mental health check for all of us. Did I catch it all? I'm trying to remember.
Yes, I think so. I know we had some questions about schools and training for teachers, and something, it was about sort of Black history curriculum and what do our textbooks teach. Those are all great questions and things to think about. I know when we met last week with the young people who put on the marches in Fayetteville and Peachtree City, that curriculum was one of the things that they talked about. When you go through years of history class and you don't learn the history of all the people that lived in this country, let alone all the people that live around the world, that impacts you just as much as the street name or other things. And so, that's definitely something that I'm going to be looking into. I don't, as well as I know our system does some training in diversity and inclusion, but is that training effective or not? And so those are both things that I am looking into as a school board member. I don't know if Jasmine, as a school board member, you have a comment on those two issues.
I think that is actually a really good example of one of the deep analyses that we need to do when we look at any system. And so some people might say, what do you mean the education system is racist? Look at all of the great opportunities Black and brown students have. But down to the curriculum level is one of those great examples where pervasive years of us being told what matters and what doesn't matter, what is a classic, what is not a classic, what should be taught, what shouldn't be taught. That is another way that racism embeds itself. So the short answer is unfortunately not. That is not an undertaking that we're doing district-wide in Clayton County, but on a micro level, classroom to classroom, this is where you get down to the teacher level, and hopefully that they can bring their whole selves to the classroom. But as a course, I am fully in favor of courses, annual, sharing all year, because to our point, this is not a moment, this is not a decision, this is a lifestyle. And that also should be represented in our curriculum. If I may, one thing I'd also love to add is my deep love of the organizing cycle. I don't know if this is going to work out, but I wrote a post-it, and the organizing cycle is something I deeply believe in, but it's organizing, which is when you get people together around a group of issues. Advocacy is you pick an issue and fight for it. And then policy is where you hope that issue gets codified in policy. And so I raised that to say that everyone opting into this lifestyle is one thing, but how you show up in it is a totally different conversation. And there's a need for all of you and all of your gifts to participate. And whether you're organizing, being an advocate around a core set of issues, or in a place to create, write, or pass policy or vote for policy, this cycle just reiterates. This is not anything that ends where you say, oh, we've made it, we've arrived. After that policy win, you go back to organizing for your next set of values, ideals, principles, and issues. And so again, just welcoming people into this work and into this fight, and letting folks know that if you are anti-racist and committed to that, there's space for you no matter what your gifts and skills are.
Thank you. Thank you. We've been going for a little while, but we still have a lot of attendees. Before we get to a few other questions or comments, we do have a candidate for school board who is on the line, and I wanted to give her a couple minutes to say hello if Candice is there. I talked a little bit about the district voting suit and the fact that I represent that district that was created, majority minority district. Fayette County, we've had a lot of firsts in the last decade: first Black mayor, first Black councilman, first Black commissioner, first Black president of the Fayette County Board of Realtors. Lots of firsts. We're still waiting on the school board, and I don't know if our candidate Candice can unmute, or we can hear her and let her introduce herself. Are you there, Candice?
I'm here, Leonard. Thank you so much. This has been a great conversation, and I appreciate the opportunity to speak with everyone and to hear feedback from so many of the great leaders here in Fayette County. I want to say, I don't know if Rousseau remembers the first time that he met me, Commissioner Rousseau. I always have fun stories about the first time I meet people, but I am an immigrant. My kids are first-generation Americans, so I come into this conversation with an additional layer, right, of what it means to be Black in America and what it means to be Black in the South, what it means to be Black in Fayette County. And I remember I was doing some research at the time because I was seeing all these Confederate monuments, people asking for these monuments to be taken down. And I went to a meeting in Tyrone, and I sat down, and this really well-dressed gentleman asked me, what did I think about the mural in Tyrone? And I looked at it and I'm like, well, it's nice. And I didn't really understand at that time the implications of what was going on. I had read articles on The Citizen. I had talked to a couple people, but that night I got the opportunity to really sit and listen to the residents of Tyrone talk about, on different sides of the aisle, what that mural meant to them and the history behind it. And so currently the board comprises of 5 individuals who have decided to stand up and give a voice, be a voice for our children's future. And I think I am looking at the opportunity to run for school board as an opportunity to expand the conversation. You're right, Leonard, in that the board has never had a Black representative, and I hope to be that Black representative, but I also understand, in being the first, that I bring along with that a lot of my personal experience, again, in being a mom to some young Black men that I will be bringing up in this community. I moved to Fayette County almost 10 years ago from New York City because I wanted a great school system. And so this is me running for school board, is me, in a sense, giving back to further that discussion, to further the good work that the school board has been doing here in Fayette County to educate all of our kids, to include diversity in these conversations and what that looks like. The change has been coming in the population in Fayette County. I've looked at the US Census, and we have not just a larger Black community that's present, that's growing here in Fayette County, but also people who are not first-generation Americans. And so if I am elected to be on the board, I want to make sure that we're including their experiences as part of that conversation about how their kids are being educated.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you so much. I think we have gotten to a lot of the questions, and we've been going for a little more than an hour now, and I don't want to take up all of everybody's Tuesday night. Definitely going to keep in touch and have the conversation remain open, because like all of us have said tonight, this isn't we talk about it one time and go home and we fixed it. This is everyday action in all the work that we do. So before we say goodbye, I just want to open it up to our panelists again and see if they have any sort of closing remarks they want to leave us with. And we can go in the same order that we went before, and we'll start with Ogechi.
Thank you. So I'm just want to reiterate my thanks for you, Leonard, bringing us together. I look forward to many more conversations, and more importantly, new faces and new voices, people in this community and beyond who are interested in this lifestyle, because it's so important. So just want to say thank you all for being here, and being willing, I hope, to have those tough conversations. I did share a couple of links in the chat, but some people may have some difficulty accessing those. So I just wanted to point to how we can share information after this. But I'm really glad to be on this panel and glad to be among all of you. So,
Thank you. Thank you. I did not know, but Vickie Butler is here with us. Vickie is a candidate for Fayette County Commissioner and a long-term, friend of mine. Many years ago, we had some very interesting PTO experiences together. But Vickie is here, and she's a candidate, and I want to give Vickie a couple minutes to introduce herself. Are you there, Vickie?
Yes, can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Hello? Okay.
Yes.
Sorry about that. I thought my picture would come up, but thank you, Leonard, and I appreciate the opportunity, and I appreciate all the speakers that have come before me. I am that Black president in the last 50 years for the Fayette County Board of Realtors that Leonard was speaking about. And I'm also right now a candidate for District 1 Fayette County Commissioner. And I am really running for this position to be a voice and a vote for residents who feel there needs to be better representation from our local government, and for those who want to maintain or have enhanced quality of life in the county through planned growth and development, workforce housing, recreational amenities, and appropriate community resources, just to name a few. And I have a very quick story for you all regarding my experience. My family has lived in Tyrone for the past 19 years, and I've lived in Georgia for the past 28 years. And as a mother raising 3 Black boys, my goal for them was to grow up around diversity. And we found that when I did my research on this county, because of the places that I've lived, growing up in Denver, Colorado, going to college in Houston, working 4 years in Toronto, and then here in Atlanta for 28 years. I also felt that because if you live around diversity, you have better opportunities as a Black male and a Black woman. And you're exposed to more things. So my goal was to expose my boys to diversity, experiences, education, and opportunities, and so was my husband. Unfortunately, when we moved to Tyrone, what happened is what we in the Black community call white flight. And that is what happened in Tyrone, but my boys were really too young to see that. But coming from the background that I came from, it did not hamper or It did not deny what our goal was for our boys. And for that reason, we purposely put decals on the back of our boys' cars to represent who they are, to lessen the chance of being pulled over by law enforcement because of racial profiling. For example, my boys are Eagle Scouts and they got their ranks here in Tyrone. So on the back of one of my son's car, he has Eagle Scout on the back and University of Kentucky. And when we do that for them, we also explain to them why. So it's better received and it lessens the chance of them trying to be cool and taking it off. So I appreciate you all listening to me. I appreciate the talk for this evening, and I would appreciate your vote on November 3rd. Thank you.
Thank you, Vickie. Thank you, Vickie. Commissioner Rousseau, parting comments.
Well, again, thank you, Leonard. Thank you, panelists. It's good to see you in virtual reality. Thank you for the individuals that have tuned in this evening. Let me say, in part of my closing remarks, there are many people that are on this link that have been in the trenches with us. I salute you. I thank you for your advocacy, your engagement. I thank you so much for your support in many instances. Not support just simply for me as an elected official and voting for me. I think support before I was an elected official and fighting these very issues. And so it comes naturally. I just want to thank this community and challenge this community to keep up the fight, engage people where it's uncomfortable, but where there is space for dialogue, space for common ground, space for policy changes. Fayette County is on the thresholds of celebrating its 200th anniversary in next year, 2021. Ogechi mentioned earlier the individuals who occupied this space long before the name Fayette was ever dreamt of or thought of. And to those whose ancestors and elders oftentimes suffered as a result of movement into this area, those elders I salute that stood tall, resisted, and sometimes succumbed to that resistance by even death for believing that the next generation and the generation after that would have opportunities that they could only dream about. And so for this community, this beloved community that I've come to call home, where my family has, and I didn't give my lineage 27 years, where our children matriculated through the school system. My advocacy and my fight began with the school system messing with one of my children. And so don't make a parent mad. Let me just say that. We all hold that when we talk about our children having fair access and equal opportunity. So again, I salute all of you all who are on the front line. Let me let you know that this conversation has not ended, it's only beginning. We have met with the young people that were organizers of the march over the last 10 days. We continue to have dialogue with them because each movement, each step has to have a set of demands. And we're asking, what are your demands and what would you like to see so that we can attempt to accommodate and reach common ground? With that, I'll close out, not dominate any more time. Again, thank you all very much for tuning in this evening. And I thank you all for the opportunity to be a voice, an advocate, and a servant leader for this community.
Thank you, brother. Sheriff.
My brother, yes, sir, in the struggle.
Sheriff, some closing remarks for us.
There was one question that I didn't get to. I did type an answer, and it was somebody asking, should the office of sheriff be nonpartisan? And I would love for the office of sheriff to be nonpartisan, just like the judges are, because it facilitates for you to make sure that people know that you're not biased. Maybe one day. I had a great discussion with Jason Carter when he was running for governor, and he promised to address that. And, you know, we didn't get that opportunity. A lot of people calling for law enforcement reform. You would probably be surprised how many of us would say, we would love to have some reform, because we can tell you some of the things that we see, because law enforcement is only the tip of the justice system that everybody recognizably sees on a daily basis. There is a whole machine behind us, and we see things that's not right. I've seen victims, things that just weren't right for our victims. And so there's a lot of things we would love to do. And Commissioner Rousseau talked about that when he talked about mental health. It is a problem in every county jail in the state, and there's not a sheriff that would not tell you they don't need to be here. But we don't hold anybody here that the courts are not holding somebody here. And we don't have, as a sheriff, we don't have the authority to release folks. There's so much to talk about that. The probation system drives us up the wall, for lack of a better term. But I'm just, to reiterate that we're very much committed to always do the right thing, no matter how difficult that is. Unfortunately, that means sometimes I make very difficult decisions. We've prosecuted 3 officers since I've been in office, 3 deputies, and that's just the way it is. You call it as you see it. Right's right, wrong's wrong. But we're all about building bridges. That's what it is, and we're always looking for better ways to do things. And really, the most important thing is what we're doing right here, and what I'm doing right here is listening. So thank you for the opportunity to be able to say some words.
Thank you so much. And Jasmine.
I just want to say thank you again, Leonard, for creating this space, and thank you to Mr. Babb, Commissioner Rousseau, Miss Oparah, and Miss Aaron, and Miss Butler, just all the panelists by name, just thank you. If I had any closing thoughts, I would say to anybody who may feel like me, a little frustrated, a little angry, that's okay. There is a such thing as righteous anger. It's not bad to be mad. It just depends on what you do with it. And honestly, if you're not a little frustrated, I question you. If everything, seems and feels all right, I implore you to do some personal exploration. And for those who may feel like me a little bit, I just, one of my mentors tells me, now's the safest time in history to be an organizer or an activist. Do you see crosses burning in your yard? Do you have to worry about, some of the things our ancestors may have had to worry about? And so, one of the things he talks about, and I share this frustration, is, if all we have to sacrifice is our comfort, even temporarily, then I think that is one commitment I challenge you to make as we exit this space, is what are you willing to sacrifice, even if for a moment? And if it's comfort, awesome. If it's your brand, your image, whatever these things that weren't a problem for our ancestors, but occupy so much of our mental space about like what sacrifices to make. If you can, keep your life, keep your values, and make some uncomfortable decisions, those are some commitments I think would be cool for anybody listening tonight, and thinking about how they can stay in this work. So thanks again, Leonard. Thank you to all of the incredible panelists, and I'm already looking forward to next time.
Thank you so much. I want to thank everyone who volunteered to participate. Kind of threw this together on a little bit short notice because I sort of feel an urgency that I haven't felt before. I think pushing out of the comfortable, I'm doing my best for what I believe in space, to the uncomfortable, doing more, sort of prompted this, and I really appreciate everyone's perspective and comments. And thank you so much for people who spent an hour and a half on a Tuesday evening voluntarily doing a Zoom and listening to some of our perspectives. And I would encourage you as the public, obviously vote, but I encourage you to push us as elected officials, ask us those hard questions, demand from us actual results. You know, you have to be the agitators from outside the system to push us to do the work with the urgency that it needs to be done, and not the comfortable speed that we want to operate at. So thank you so much for listening. Again, we're going to follow this up with more conversations and more work. And again, good night, everybody. Thanks.